It started quietly. No blood, no screams, just silence. At Countess of Chester Hospital in the United Kingdom, babies began dying at a rate that sent shivers through the neonatal ward. Premature infants, who had been stabilizing, suddenly crashed. Healthy babies, born with strong cries, slipped away without warning. And always, the pattern was the same. A nurse was present, every single time. Her name? Lucy Letby. A soft-spoken, seemingly devoted pediatric nurse with round glasses and a reassuring smile. She wasn't new. She wasn't untrained. She was trusted. But trust in this story is the most dangerous thing of all. Because behind the sterile walls of that hospital, something horrifying was happening. Not once, not twice, but again and again and again. Infants injected with air, fed fatal doses of insulin, poisoned, collapsed, revived, and then, somehow, attacked again. Nurses wept. Doctors grew frantic. But no one could explain it, until they looked closer. And the same name kept surfacing, Lucy Letby. This is the story of a medical system that hesitated to suspect one of its own, of grieving parents silenced by procedure, of a woman who wore the mask of compassion while allegedly carrying out one of the most chilling killing sprees in modern British history. The angel of death wasn't in disguise. She was already inside. To truly understand the scale of what happened, we have to return to the place where it all began. The neonatal unit, Countess of Chester Hospital. A mid-sized modern hospital in the northwest of England. Clean corridors, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint beep of machines monitoring newborn life. The neonatal unit was supposed to be a place of hope, of miracles, where tiny babies fought their way into the world and were met with expert care. But by 2015, something shifted. At first, it was easy to explain away. One baby suddenly crashed, then another. Staff called them unexplained collapses, a medical mystery. Something no one wanted to admit could be deliberate. Doctors tried everything, more tests, better protocols. They rechecked ventilators, rebalanced feeding lines, and even rotated staff. But still, the babies kept dying. Each case was tragic. Each one came with its own set of complications. But then the coincidences piled up. Baby A, a twin, born prematurely but stable, collapsed suddenly, died after air was found in his bloodstream. The nurse on duty? Lucy Letby. Baby B, his twin sister, collapsed just 28 hours later, survived but barely. The nurse? Lucy Letby again. Baby C, no health concerns, collapsed, died in his incubator. Nurse? Lucy Letby. By the time hospital staff realized something was deeply wrong, 7 babies were dead. And more than 10 others had suffered near-fatal, unexplained collapses. What was going on? Some of the babies had been injected with air into their bloodstream, a method virtually unheard of outside murder cases. Others had been fed milk after their charts had ordered nothing by mouth. A few were poisoned with fatal doses of insulin. These weren't random medical errors. This was a pattern. And in the center of that pattern was Lucy. But even then, despite red flags, nothing was done. Doctors whispered, some raised alarms, but the administration? They pushed back. Letby was seen as kind, quiet, devoted. She wouldn't hurt a fly, some said. But flies weren't the ones dying. Infants were, and the ones who survived would carry invisible scars for life. By early 2016, the staff at Countess of Chester Hospital were divided. Some doctors were seeing it clearly. Too many babies, too many deaths. One common factor. Others couldn't, or wouldn't, believe it. Lucy Letby had trained there. She was one of them. Quiet, reliable. The kind of nurse who brought in cupcakes on birthdays, who volunteered for extra shifts, who stayed with grieving parents long after her shift ended. It's not her, one staff member said. She loves those babies. But Dr. Stephen Breary, lead consultant on the neonatal ward, started asking questions. Again and again, one thing came up. Lucy was always present during the collapses. Even on nights she wasn't supposed to work, she'd trade shifts, and the death would follow. Breary took it to hospital management. He showed them the data, the overlap, the statistical impossibility of one nurse being on duty by chance. And what did management do? They pushed back, warned him not to make accusations, not without proof. They said Lucy Letby was being targeted unfairly, that she was the victim of a witch hunt. The hospital refused to remove her from duty, so the deaths continued. In one case, a baby girl was recovering well, no longer on oxygen, stable. Then Letby arrived. By morning, the child had suffered unexplained brain damage, the only person who had been alone with her, Lucy. Still, no action was taken. Instead, hospital executives began protecting their image. They even apologized to Lucy for the stress caused by the consultant's concerns. One internal email read, "We need to draw a line under this, there's no evidence." But the evidence was right in front of them, in patient charts, in medication records, in timelines, and in the tiny coffins that kept leaving the hospital chapel. Letby was eventually moved, but not suspended, just reassigned to an administrative role, still employed, still walking the halls, still free. And that's when one doctor went outside the system. He contacted the Cheshire police. He didn't know it yet, but that call would trigger the most extensive investigation into a healthcare worker in UK history. It began quietly. In May 2017, Cheshire Police launched Operation Hummingbird, a discreet forensic investigation into the unexplained deaths at Countess of Chester Hospital. The public wasn't informed. The media didn't notice. Not yet. Behind the scenes, detectives began combing through hundreds of hours of hospital records. Oxygen levels, nurse schedules, drug inventories, infant autopsies. They weren't just looking for mistakes, they were looking for patterns. And the name Lucy Letby came up again, and again, and again. Each spike in deaths, each unexplained collapse, each heartbreaking parental statement, all pointed back to her. But police needed more than patterns, they needed evidence. So they built a case slowly, carefully, one baby at a time. Over 18 months, they narrowed in on 17 suspicious incidents, 7 babies dead, 10 more who'd survived, barely. By 2018, they were ready to act. On July 3, 2018, police arrived at Lucy Letby's home in Chester. She answered the door wearing pajamas, calm, polite. Exactly as colleagues had described her. She didn't cry, she didn't shout. She simply said, "Is this about the babies?" Then turned around and placed her hands behind her back. The arrest shocked the country. Neighbours watched as the sweet girl next door, the nurse who once handed out balloons at fundraisers, was led away in handcuffs. Police searched her home. What they found was chilling. A post-it note, handwritten and tucked inside a diary, read, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. I am evil. I did this." But on that same note, she also wrote, "I haven't done anything wrong." It was a contradiction scribbled in panic, a mind unraveling under the weight of secrets. Investigators also found hospital handover sheets, documents Letby had no reason to take home. She had kept them, souvenirs of the babies she cared for, and maybe killed. Police seized computers, medical textbooks, even her childhood teddy bear. Everything became potential evidence. Still, despite the arrest, she was released on bail. She returned home, and while the investigation continued in silence, the families waited. Some still believed in her. Some thought it was all a mistake. But others, they knew. And when the case returned to the headlines in 2020, Lucy Letby was arrested again. This time, she was charged. 7 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder. The headlines exploded. Neonatal nurse charged in baby deaths. Lucy Letby, the angel of death? Parents who once hugged her, thanked her, trusted her, now sat in courtrooms, waiting for justice. The trial would take years, but the truth was finally crawling into the light. The courtroom was quiet. Parents sat shoulder to shoulder, clutching tissues, holding hands, bracing for details no human should ever hear. Because this case wasn't theoretical, it wasn't symbolic. It was about real babies, born alive, fought for breath, then died, in the hands of someone they were supposed to be safe with. The prosecution outlined the nightmare. Child A, a healthy twin boy, suddenly collapsed within hours, resuscitated, briefly. Then, gone. The next day, Child B, his twin sister, collapsed the exact same way. The odds of that happening naturally? Nearly impossible. But it didn't stop there. Child C, Child D, Child E. One after another, rapid declines, strange symptoms, unexplained deaths. Some babies were found with air in their veins. Some were given excessive amounts of insulin. Others bled from the mouth or experienced catastrophic collapses moments after Letby was alone with them. And every time she was questioned, she had an excuse. It must have been sepsis. Premature lungs are tricky. Maybe a medication reaction. But with each excuse came a pattern. Letby was present, always. Sometimes the last to feed the baby. Sometimes the one who discovered them collapsed. Sometimes the nurse who volunteered to cover extra shifts just to be around them. And just as disturbing, she sent sympathy cards to the grieving parents, signed in pink ink, words like "so sorry for your loss" and "thinking of you during this difficult time." One card was written the same day a baby died. She went home. She made tea. She wrote condolences to a family she may have murdered. Now pause here for a moment. Let's ask what everyone's thinking. If a nurse who smiled, handed out balloons and texted parents could be behind so much death, how do you ever truly spot evil? Let us know what you think in the comments. Could someone like Lucy Letby hide right in plain sight? Also, if you're watching and want more deeply researched, emotionally raw true crime stories like this one, subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and we've got more stories coming that you won't believe. It began in October 2022, the largest murder trial of a nurse in UK history. Lucy Letby stood accused of murdering 7 infants and attempting to kill at least 10 more. The courtroom was transformed into something more than legal procedure. It became a battlefield of grief, where parents testified, doctors were grilled, and decades of trust in the medical system began to fray. The prosecution's case? Chilling, precise, relentless. They brought in top forensic pathologists, digital evidence experts, medical records, blood sugar charts, shift logs, and most damning of all, Lucy's own handwritten notes. One read, "I am evil, I did this," scrawled on a post-it, found among journals in her bedroom, right next to an innocent-looking stuffed toy. She claimed it was part of a breakdown, a moment of guilt, not admission. But for the jury, it hit like a confession. Another read, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." But Letby's lawyers pushed back. They argued that the hospital was chaotic, that neonatal units are emotionally charged places where infants often die due to natural causes, that she was being made a scapegoat for systemic failures. They claimed the doctors were obsessed with her, that their suspicions grew from frustration, not facts. They questioned the integrity of the investigations, the reliability of autopsies, even the idea of motive. Because what was the motive? Letby had no history of abuse, no debts, no religious obsession, no romantic betrayal. She had nothing except proximity to death. And that's what made it so terrifying. Because how do you stop someone who doesn't seem to have a reason? One doctor testified with shaking hands. He had noticed the pattern early on, raised the alarm, warned his superiors. But no one listened, not at first. And by the time they did, more babies had died. Some were injected with insulin. Some had fatal air bubbles introduced. Some were overfed milk through tubes, their bellies distended. Each death was carefully masked as a medical emergency. Each survival, a miracle. Letby sat through it all, silent, expressionless, sometimes crying, sometimes writing, but never explaining. The courtroom was tense. After months of agonizing testimony, 9 months of trial and weeks of jury deliberation, the verdict came down, piece by piece. Guilty of 7 counts of murder. Guilty of 7 counts of attempted murder. Each verdict landed like a hammer, not just on Letby, but on every parent seated in that courtroom. Some collapsed, others sobbed. A few stared at her, waiting for a flicker of remorse. But Lucy Letby didn't flinch. She refused to appear in the courtroom when her sentence was read. She didn't face the parents, didn't acknowledge the lives she stole, didn't apologize. It was the final act of control. The judge called her crimes a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies. And then came the sentence. Whole life term. No parole, no appeals, no possibility of ever walking free. Only 3 women in UK history have ever received such a sentence. Lucy Letby became the 4th, but the story didn't end there. Because in the wake of the trial, the NHS was forced to confront its own silence. Whistleblowers, neonatal consultants who had raised alarms for months, revealed how they were ignored, threatened, even silenced. Emails showed hospital executives were more concerned about reputational damage than listening to doctors. At one point, after a string of deaths, Letby was briefly moved, but then brought back. Babies died again, and now the public was asking, how many could have been saved if someone had just listened sooner? Parents called for investigations, politicians demanded reforms, a full public inquiry was launched into the Countess of Chester Hospital. A report is still pending. But the damage, it's irreversible. Grieving parents were handed not only the death of their children, but also the haunting knowledge that it could have been prevented. That somewhere, systems failed. That Lucy Letby didn't operate in darkness. She worked under bright hospital lights. She smiled at parents, held dying babies, wrote sympathy cards to families after she killed their children, and no one stopped her. Now, before we move on to the final chapter of this chilling story, here's a question for you. Do you think someone who refuses to face their victims in court deserves a harsher sentence, or does the whole life term speak loud enough? Let me know in the comments. And if this case has you stunned, hit subscribe for more true stories like this one. We've got more coming. Lucy Letby will die in prison. Her name, now etched in history as Britain's most prolific child serial killer, will never be forgotten. But not for the reasons she once imagined. She won't be remembered for saving lives, for comforting anxious mothers, or for being the quiet, caring nurse her friends once described. She will be remembered for betraying the most sacred trust in medicine, the duty to protect the innocent. Inside the Central California Women's Facility where she now resides, Letby lives in isolation, a prison built for the most dangerous female offenders. And even there, she is kept away from the general population, not out of mercy, but because other inmates want her dead. They've seen the news, heard the crimes, and even among murderers, a child killer is despised. She eats alone, walks alone, sleeps under 24-hour surveillance. She's been called a ghost with a heartbeat, a woman still alive, but already erased from the world. But outside those prison walls, the damage continues to echo. Hospitals across the UK began re-auditing their neonatal units. Protocols were rewritten. Whistleblower protections strengthened. Because Lucy Letby didn't just kill children. She shattered faith in a system designed to protect the most vulnerable. Doctors who once trusted their hospitals to act in patients' best interests now carry doubt. Parents who once felt safe handing over their newborns now hesitate. And every future nurse who walks into a neonatal unit carries the burden of suspicion Letby left behind. Her trial revealed not just a killer, but a system-wide failure. A structure so scared of scandal, it chose silence over safety, PR over prevention, reputation over lives. And Lucy Letby used that silence like a scalpel. She didn't stab, she didn't strangle, she didn't shoot. She worked with air and insulin, with poison disguised as care. She took the most invisible routes to death, believing they'd never be traced. And for a while, she was right. But this case made it clear. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it wears scrubs, smiles, and writes sympathy cards. There's no headstone for most of her victims, no graves, just tiny footprints, tiny names, and a void that stretches a lifetime for their parents. Letby will likely never speak again in public. No confession, no apology, just silence. A silence almost as chilling as the crimes themselves. And so the story ends, not with answers, not with peace, but with the one question no one can let go of. How many more were there? Because in 2016, when Letby was finally removed from the ward, the deaths stopped, completely. And that alone is enough to haunt a nation forever. If this story shook you, watch our other deep dive true crime documentaries. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment below. Should nurses involved in infant deaths always face public inquiries, even before conviction? Your voice matters, and your attention might just be what stops the next Lucy Letby.